and welcome to The Winning Mentality, the podcast getting the stories behind sporting success with me, Charlie Bosco. My guest today is involved with an activity so far removed from all other motorsport that it's questionable whether we can even class it as a sport at all, but when the story is this good, who cares? Richard Noble became fascinated by speed records as a child, and now, with his 70th birthday already been and gone, he remains as passionate about the subject as ever. He broke the land speed record himself in 1983, and then ran the project to create the first supersonic car, which officially broke the sound barrier, and with it, Richard's old record in 1997. You'd have thought that that would be the end of it, but over the past 11 years, he's been working on yet another land speed record car, which he is hoping will reach 1,000 miles per hour and simultaneously inspire a whole new generation of engineers and adventurers. Richard, welcome to The Winning Mentality. Absolute pleasure to have you on here because as a boy, I read your book about Thrust SSC, so I'm somewhat starstruck.
Help!
And I think most people understand how you get into mainstream motorsport, Formula One and NASCAR. How on earth does one get involved in land speed records?
Well, first of all, you've got to get the disease. That's the first thing. So and I got the disease age 6 because there was a guy called John Cobb who held the world land speed record, who's going for the world water speed record with a jet boat Crusader in Loch Ness way back in 1952. And I just saw this boat. This amazing boat sitting on the jetty there on Loch Ness, and I thought, wow, this is for me. And it doesn't let go. That's it. You know, you've got to spend the rest of your life doing it. And basically, I started quite a successful commercial career, and then I suddenly realized, I've got to go and do this. I can't really live with myself unless at least I've had a go, and I can one day talk to my family and say, yes, I had a go. Yeah, it didn't get very far, but at least I had a go.
I understand having a go, but where do you start? It's just so overwhelmingly challenging on so many levels. What's the first step you took towards land speed records?
Well, the first step basically was to draw up something, get some sort of idea. And then I sold my beloved TR6 sports car. So that gave me, 1,100 quid or something. And I bought a jet engine. And I managed to get the jet engine out of the yard before the French government appeared to go and buy it. So we got the jet engine, and I built a very, very simple jet car, and I didn't know what I was doing, and it was incredibly dangerous. It nearly killed me. But we got going, and I learned so much from that. Then we moved on to the Thrust 2 car, which was built on the Isle of Wight, led by a brilliant guy, John Ackroyd. And we got that car built and eventually got the world land speed record.
Did you come from an engineering background, or were you learning from scratch?
I was learning from scratch. As a kid, I got very, very highly motivated by all this, and I just went and bought books and, self-educated.
So as your projects progress, you end up eventually with Thrust 2.
Yep.
And you broke the land speed record.
Yep.
We could have a podcast, I'm sure, in the stage we've just skipped out from your first jet car to actually breaking the land speed record. But what was that process like?
It was very, very tough, incredibly tough. I mean, we started with 175 quid, that's all we had. And John, much of it is due to John. And John, what we did was we rented a kitchen in a derelict house, and that became John's drawing office. And we couldn't even afford a telephone, so he had to walk up to the local telephone box and hoard his coins carefully. And I still remember this wonderful moment when he said, here is the first part of the car. The first part of the car was a little air cleaner, a vent for one of the fuel tanks. And I held this in my hand and said, hey, that's the first bit of the car. My God, now we've got to do the rest.
And you ended up breaking the land speed record
Yep.
in Thrust 2, and you drove the car.
Yes, I did, yeah. Mm.
Did you come from a driving background? Did you also have to educate yourself on the technicalities of the driving?
Well, basically, we started driving the car without its body on it, so it was just purely as a space frame. And we got a lot of experience. We found the greatest thing to do was to run at the air shows, because the air show people would pay us to turn up, and that gave us the experience, which was really useful. Then, of course, they finished the car and took it to Bonneville, and that was an absolute nightmare because we were trying to run the car on its solid wheels on salt, and the solid wheels on salt don't work.
This is the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah.
Bonneville Salt Flats, yeah. And it just doesn't work. And the car's absolute nightmare to drive because you've got no feedback through the steering. The whole thing was all over the place. We got it sideways at 175 miles an hour, and I seem to remember we were nearly sideways at about 300. But eventually on that thing, we did peak out at about 500 miles an hour the first. But then it rained. The place flooded. That was that. So we had to go home and fight another battle to get out again. And we had to get out. We got out again in 1982. But as soon as we arrived at Bonneville, it flooded again. So that was no good. So we then found this other place called the Black Rock Desert, which was the right surface for the tires, for the wheels, sorry. And this was absolutely great. And finally, in 1983, we got the world record, only just because the car was within 7 miles an hour flying. But we did it.
You'll have to expand on that. You were within 7 miles an hour taking off when you analysed the data.
Yeah.
How was that not flagged beforehand? Is it just because you're taking such a big step into the unknown?
Well, it's early days. It's very early days. And basically, it took forever to get the data out of the car. And what we found was that we were carrying too much weight on the front of the car. So we raised the nose of the car very, very slightly. This, of course, had a huge compound effect. But we got the record. That was the important thing. Then we go home.
Well, interestingly, when we were chatting before we started recording, I asked about downforce because I'm a motorsports fan, but there is no downforce on these cars, is there?
We've got a real problem because basically the aerodynamics of this mean that the loads increases as the square root of speed. And the speed range of these cars is so enormous. So to give you an idea, with the Thrust SSC car, we got it wrong on one run and we had over 10 tons of downforce. So you've got to be jolly careful.
So how does the car stick to the ground if it's not downforce?
It skims. It's a skimmer.
Like a pebble across a lake?
Yeah, that's right. But the rules state that the car must leave wheel tracks, and the FIA people need to be assured that the car is always on the ground. Now, the thing about it, of course, is that it's always, if it's not on the ground, it's probably 20,000 feet in the air.
So when you say leave tracks, is the land speed record is measured in a 1 kilometer run? Or 1 kilometer?
A mile or a kilometer.
A mile or a kilometer.
Mile is always seen as the more difficult one, so that's the one we tend to take.
And the car does one way and then goes back and they take the average speed?
That's right. It's 2 passes over the measured mile and it's the average of the speed.
And is there any rule on how many tyre tracks it has to leave or how long they have to be?
Basically, the scrutineers have to be sure that the car is on the ground during the measured mile.
So when you broke the land speed record, you are the land speed record holder. Every dream you've ever had has come true.
Yeah.
Did you think that was the end of it?
Yes. What happens is that, these things are a big, big project and they're done by very small teams. So you're absolutely exhausted at the end of it. But I moved on after that to set up an aircraft company because I'd learned to fly and I got very thrilled with flying. And I couldn't understand why we were flying these terrible old American airplanes. And so we set about doing our own airplane called the ARV Super 2. And finally we got it certificated and into production. Hell of a battle. And eventually about 40 were made.
And you mentioned earlier that you had the disease. The disease obviously crept back.
Yeah.
Because the fact that we're sitting in your office 35 years later.
That's right.
Tells you it didn't end with your record. Where did Thrust SSC, the world's first supersonic car, come from?
Well, I'd done a number of other projects which had happened beforehand. So we'd done the airplanes. We tried to do a ship. It was a wonderful ship, but sadly we never got it built. The country went into recession at the wrong moment, and we just couldn't get the money to get it built, which is really sad. And then the next thing we heard was that Craig Breedlove, holder of the land speed record, he'd held it about, I think it was 5 times in all. Amazing guy, had decided that he was going to produce the world's first supersonic car. And what happened is that an old friend of mine, Art Arfons, who held the world land speed record before, Art had built a car and we were all out on Bonneville running this thing. And basically, Craig took me on one side and said, I bought myself the engines and I'm going to build this car. We're going to be the first supersonic. So I then came back to Britain, and the most extraordinary thing happened then because people started phoning me up saying, Richard, you should know something is going on. But we've all had to sign non-disclosure, so we can't tell you, but you should know something is going on. And there was a hell of a lot of talk about all this, and it later discovered this was the McLaren Maverick. So the McLaren people were hell-bent. So Ron Dennis was hell-bent on getting the world land speed record. So this was very interesting. So we got the Americans and we got Ron Dennis, and I thought, well, we're not going to be left out of this. I mean, this is fantastic. It's going to be a battle for the first ever supersonic car. And not only this, basically way back in 1947, the British government had bottled out of the Miles 52 project, which meant that Britain never got the first ever supersonic airplane. We really could have done that, and it set the entire aircraft industry back by about 15 years. And so this seemed a great moment to sort of right a few wrongs, to build the world's first supersonic car. So we kind of set off, and there was a wonderful moment when I found myself in Palm Springs speaking at a Castrol conference. And Castrol every 5 years get all their main companies together, and this is what they decided to do. And I stood up and gave them a lecture on their brand, because the Castrol brand has got incredible value and recognition and everything else. And I went on to say, guys, you've got to remember that every generation has got to add to the brand, otherwise it'll die. And I came back to my seat, which was with the board, and Jonathan Fry then said to me, Richard, you're setting us up, aren't you? And I said, yes. Come and see us when we get back. And they gave us the magic 40,000 quid, which was our entire research budget.
That was the entire research budget, 40,000?
Yep.
So what research did you do? What's the first thing you look into?
Well, this was amazing. I mean, the great thing really was that I was just really lucky because of a sheer coincidence to meet this guy called Ron Ayres. And Ron is the great aerodynamicist. And he got very excited by this. And so what happened was we worked with Swansea University, basically did the first ever computation fluid dynamics on the car design. So it's the first car ever designed using CFD. And then we had a huge problem. We were a team of 3. And our fundamental problem basically was that did we believe it? Were we actually going to go ahead and build this thing? And would anybody else believe us? So, and Ron wasn't very sure about it either. So what we had to do was to find another way of getting the data. And we couldn't use wind tunnels because, of course, we needed a supersonic wind tunnel. Not only a supersonic wind tunnel, but a supersonic wind tunnel with a moving ground underneath. And this was just getting too difficult. And so we came up with this idea of using the long test track at Pendine in South Wales. In other words, basically firing models of the car at very high speeds, supersonic speeds, over a bit of representative desert. And this was spectacular. We had some 20 rockets for each run. The car would accelerate, the model car would accelerate from 0 to 820 miles an hour in 0.8 of a second, 40 G, and then would run over the representative bit of desert. And this was absolutely amazing. So we did, I think it was about 13 of these runs before we ran out of the old rocket supply. And Ron then took the data from the CFD and the data from the rocket and put it together on a graph, and we got a straight line correlation. At that moment, we realized we could do it. We got it. I mean, it was just absolutely amazing. Somebody up there was looking after us. It was extraordinary.
Part of you must have been happy. Part of you must have been almost disappointed because you've experienced these projects before and suddenly you're at the bottom of this big hill all over again.
Well, yes, but I mean, in this case, you're going to build the first ever supersonic. I mean, that is a fantastic thing. And then we got to get on with it. So
you got on with it, and again, I'm sure we could have a whole podcast on the details of that, but you end up breaking the sound barrier.
Yes, we did, yes. On total of 5 times officially, and there was one other unofficial time, so 6 in all. And Andy Green did the driving and did an absolutely superb job. It was a very, very difficult car.
Was it a hard decision not to drive it yourself?
Yeah, I was. There's a number of reasons. One is that basically I had hoped that we were going to get an easy ride with the sponsorship. Basically, we held the world land speed record. We'd held it for all those years. That's the first thing. Secondly, that we'd done the research properly. We got good results. And now it was just a matter of putting the money in and getting the car built. And I went round all these big companies who were, and they were going through an era, we were in an era where they were telling everybody how wonderful they were and how brave they were and how innovative they were, which of course is they weren't. And I would go to these various boards and sit down with the boards and say, here we are, guys, here's all the data, we can do this. And they were absolutely horrified. And this was a foretaste of things to come. I mean, they really weren't going to get in there. So now we were faced with a situation where we knew we could do it, but we hadn't got the money. And so it had to be put together from lots and lots of small deals. Very often the smaller companies are much more innovative and much more creative than the larger ones. And also they're then still being run by the founders of the company who are innovative and entrepreneurial, etc., and will have a go. And I realized that basically it was going to be an enormous job to get this money together and get it done. So that meant that really I'd got to give up on the driving and concentrate on running the project and making the money.
Just because learning to drive the car would be an equally big task.
It turned out to be a very difficult task, particularly because the car was rear wheel steered, and that meant it was an absolute nightmare. And looking back on it, I don't think I could ever have done it. Andy did the most wonderful job, and basically it was very unstable until it went supersonic, and then it was stable.
I understand the reticence of the companies really to support it though, because I understand also that you've done the testing, but there must still be a huge leap into the unknown.
Yeah.
You can't be certain what's going to happen when it crosses the sound barrier.
Absolutely. Unknown, never been done before. It was a world first. And of course, there you are. There are these companies who've got to risk some of their sponsorship budget on this thing, which could so easily go terribly wrong.
And just nipping back to the driving, it would be easy to watch a land speed record and think you basically press the loud pedal and then press the slow down pedal. There's an awful lot going on. I've seen pictures inside the cockpits of the supersonic cars. There's an extraordinary amount for the driver to be thinking about and reacting to.
Oh, yeah.
Just explain, if you can, what Andy Green, the driver of Thrust SSC and the driver in the future of Bloodhound, has to do in the space of a very short run.
Well, what you've got to do, you're absolutely right. You see, the fundamental problem is that it's not like a race car where you can spend an awful lot of time in testing and developing. I know that's all been restricted now, but even so, you've still got a lot of time of testing and so on. These cars, you simply don't. I mean, the cost is enormous, and if you're operating in America, then the weather window is probably about 6 weeks or so. So it's a very, very difficult thing, and Thrust SSC was supremely difficult because basically it was twin jet. We couldn't actually accelerate the car away from stationary with full power because otherwise the jets just sucked up the desert. So we had to actually accelerate to about 70 or 80 miles an hour before the intake's pressurized, and then we could gradually get up to full power by about 200. It was rear wheel steer. The rear wheel steer meant that there was a lag in the steering inputs. Andy found that he had to drive and put his inputs in at a certain rate. If you put them in too fast or in too slow, then the car would get away from him. When he got up to about 590 odd miles an hour, the shock waves would establish around the rear wheels, and they would drag the tail of the car to the right and the car itself to the left. So he then had to pull in full opposite lock and hold full opposite lock up to Mach 1. What do we peak out at? 1.02. Yeah.
What is the physical effect of the sound wave and breaking the sound barrier on a car?
Well, this is really very interesting. When we set about this project, all sorts of people who really understood in the aerospace industry said, this thing is really dangerous. You're going to kill Andy. It's really dangerous. It can't be done. You're going to get tremendous buffeting. But curious enough, we didn't. I mean, the car itself was very, very good aerodynamically, and we didn't have the buffeting. Certainly, we had a few problems around the back end, but the rest of it was very stable. And I remember Andy and I talking about all this in the pub, and saying, "Andy, what's it really like?" Because what had happened was I'd flown an airplane down the track one day, and I was appalled to see the whole track was zigzags all the way down. And this is what he'd been doing. He'd been fighting this thing all the way down until it got to supersonic, and then it settled down. He said, when it's supersonic, it's a real pussycat.
But there's no doubting there is an element of danger.
Oh yes, I mean this is pioneering stuff. I mean it's never been done before, and it's never been done since.
The sound barrier hasn't been broken on land since you achieved it in 1997.
We're the only ones in the world. Yep.
Now, after you've broken the land speed record, you then go supersonic. Surely you must have thought that the disease had gone then, because in a way that seemed like going to the moon, or that was it, really.
Yeah, and that's exactly the situation. I mean, the extraordinary thing about it is it was done with a very small team of people. The total money we spent, total cash, was 2.48 million. That was all.
And you were showing me just before we started recording some of the figures involved. The website for Thrust SSC was the most popular in the world that day.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it did. We did over 300 million pages. And there's huge worldwide following for the land speed record. We didn't realize just how big it is. It's absolutely enormous. And even today, some 400,000 visitors see the car on display in Coventry.
Because I know, as a teenager reading your book about the whole process, being utterly inspired, but also thinking, well, that's the end of land speed records. It's been done now. I mean, you could go to Mach 2, but it's a bit like running a 3.5 minute mile as opposed to a 4-1. The big barrier had been broken.
Yes.
So when did talk of 1,000 miles an hour begin?
Right. Well, then what happened was that I was doing another aircraft program, and suddenly in the middle of this, we discovered that Steve Fossett was hell-bent on taking our record.
He was a legendary explorer.
Oh, my God. What an amazing guy. 110 world records, solo ballooned around the world. Imagine doing that. Flew 1.5 times around the world non-stop. I mean, just amazing. And his whole career was set about this. And the great thing was that he made an awful lot of money in Chicago, so consequently he could fund it all. So you've got the motivation and the money and determination, this extraordinary ability, extraordinary mixture. So he represented a real threat. And Andy Green and I met in a pub in Whitehall and said, what the hell are we going to do? And we decided we'd take him on. So we reckoned he could do 800, so we've got to do 1,000. It's really as simple as that.
So what year was this? Because Steve Fossett disappeared in an aviation accident in 2005?
2005, 2006, I can't remember which. We actually got started in 2007. And that's when we formed the company. And we started July 2007, and we actually started work about 6 months before.
And was the goal always 1,000?
Yeah.
And what's very interesting, if you look at the Bloodhound website and your social media and chatting to you, it's very clear that there's a bigger purpose beyond just breaking 1,000 miles an hour. You want to inspire a generation.
Yes. Well, basically, all of us really in the project have been inspired at one time or other by some of these fantastic projects. I particularly, by what was going on in the Cold War, the development of the first ever supersonic aircraft and the Concorde. I, curious enough, hold the Concorde record. I'm the only idiot in the world who's been to New York twice in 12 hours. I don't think anybody will ever beat that one. But, I mean, it was awe-inspiring what was being achieved there. The sheer professionalism. I doubt we could do that today,
The Concorde project.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely astonishing. And people taking very high levels of risk, of course. And today we live in a risk-averse society, so people would find it very difficult to do that.
It's very clear that you're quite a patriot. You want to do this for Britain as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, hell, yes, absolutely. We live in this country and, and it has a fantastic heritage, and every generation has got to do its bit. It's a bit like Castrol and the brand, you've got to do your bit. And this seemed to us a fantastic opportunity. I mean, it really did. And then we were asked by the Minister of Defence to set it up as an education program. And that's been absolutely enormous. I mean, it really does deliver big, big time.
Could you give us some of the statistics about the declining rate of interest in engineering, declining rates of graduates, and also why that's so important in years to come? Yeah.
Well, basically, the country is in serious trouble. I mean, we're going into Brexit now. We're going to be on our own. We've got to manufacture like we've never manufactured before. Curious enough, the manufacturing figures are at record levels. at the moment now, which is really exciting. But it's still only around about 9 or 10% of gross domestic product, whereas, in the larger countries like Switzerland, Switzerland is the larger company, but in a country like Switzerland, for instance, it's about 25, 27%, which is the right sort of figure. So it's got to get a lot bigger than that. And it can't get any bigger because we simply haven't got the skills. And the companies are now really struggling. They're trying to import the skills, and obviously the difficulties of leaving the EU and so on is very, very serious. And what we found was that in terms of education, that there's a thing called PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, which is run by the OECD. And when we started Bloodhound in 2007, we started taking an interest in education in 2008. But in 2007, Britain was 4th and 5th in the world in terms of the abilities of effectively these teenagers, which are being assessed by PISA. Now we're 22nd and 23rd in terms of literacy and numeracy.
In less than a decade.
In less than a decade, and the rest of the world's running away from us. I mean, it really very, very serious.
So how does it work? Did you approach the government and say, this is what we'd like to do, and this is how we feel it will benefit the country?
No. We were told how to do it. What was really interesting was that we had a meeting with a wonderful character, Lord Drayson, Paul Drayson. Drayson was the Minister of Defence Equipment and Support at the Ministry of Defence. It was Andy's idea that we went to, and somehow Andy engineered a meeting with him. And the idea was to get the guy enthusiastic and ask him to support us with the engines. These are the Eurofighter engines, which are absolutely crucial for the car. And anyhow, we got him very excited and very worked up. And then I asked the question, would you help us with the engines? And that wasn't going to happen. So Andy and I then had to sort of beat a retreat and thank him very much for his time. And we headed for the door, but we never got to the door, because he stopped us. He said, hang on, we've got a real problem in the Ministry of Defence. We can't recruit scientists and engineers. What we want is a stimulating project to really fire them up. I think you've got what might be necessary. What I want you to do is to take the project and run it through every single school in the country. And in 2016, we succeeded in face-to-face presentations and inspiring a total of 129,000 school children.
And the statistics from the States during the NASA program are very clear.
Yeah.
Investment leads to increased rates of graduates and a general interest in science. Did you know that beforehand? And did you present that to the government?
No, we didn't. We certainly didn't.
So you've unearthed all this?
Yes, yeah. Because basically we were faced with a problem. We've got to deliver for the Ministry of Defence. These guys are going to support us and help us. We've got to deliver for them. It's got to be done on a kind of national scale. How the hell are we going to do it? And we were very fortunate to find this US government data, which showed that the number of PhDs during the Apollo program basically trebled. It's absolutely enormous, because what President Kennedy had done was he'd inspired the entire nation. We don't do this because it's easy. We do it because it's hard. And what a fantastic guy. What an amazing personal achievement.
Britain these days is a relatively conservative country. I don't mean politically with the Conservative Party, but it is quite a conservative place. And the view of government is really that it's about social security and the NHS and motorways.
Yep.
There's inspiration lacking.
It is a real problem. I mean, basically, what we've generated in Britain is the safest and most risk-averse country in the world, I think. So here we are trying to do a car which will go 1,000 miles an hour in a risk-averse country.
So how's the educational side of the project developed, and how's it been received as you've got into schools?
It's very impressive. I mean, it really is. Because we are simply doing what basically the engineers did way back in the Cold War. We've got a fantastic, exciting project. The kids get very, very inspired. They get very worked up. And of course, the interesting thing is that they haven't actually been exposed to engineering at all. And basically, the country is a media-driven country. It's all about singing and dancing and getting lost in the jungle and all the rest. And the kids believe that is the important thing in their life. They're being motivated, inspired in that direction, whereas we need scientists and engineers big time.
And are the effects already being seen? I mean, the project is not near completion, but...
Oh my God, yes, yeah. We had the first Bloodhound kid make it through to Cambridge about 3 or 4 years
What do you
ago.
mean, first Bloodhound kid?
Well, somebody who got really inspired at probably, I don't know what age he got inspired at, but I suspect it was probably around about 10 or 12. And it's very interesting. I mean, you're seeing these kids being really turned on and really excited. Now, the key to it is, of course, we're making all this data on the car available.
Yes, tell me more about this. I've heard about this. You're going to live stream the data.
Yeah, big time, but not just small quantities of data, real big quantities of data. 20 gigabytes per run. So this is enormous. And what happened was that we didn't know how to do this education thing. We really didn't. And the great thing about it was that we were outside the education system. So therefore, we could approach it with fresh views, fresh ideas. And the various British institutions were incredibly helpful to us. They gave us an enormous amount of data and help. But I had this awful feeling at the back of my mind that we weren't actually getting the fresh ideas from the real teachers. What's it like? So we took a stand at a thing called the BET Show, which is a huge annual education show in Britain. And the whole idea was to meet large numbers of teachers. And they told us, and they said, first of all, it's very difficult inspiring the kids because they're not excited by mathematics. They see it as being difficult. They see physics as being absolutely impossible. And they don't see it really as being important to their lifestyle. And so we said, we've been asked to do this by the Ministry of Defense. Does it make sense? And they said, yes, it does, but you're doing it wrong. So I said, good, fine, tell us how to do it. And what they said was, we want live data from the car into the classroom so we can study it all. We can effectively second guess your design team. And we initially, I thought, well, we can't do this. It's just an enormous project. But then, as you know, we're operating in South Africa, and the MTN Networks company very generously then put up the masts, 4 70-meter high radio masts, so we can bounce the data from the car across the Kalahari Desert and into the internet. And then Oracle US, the US board, decided to back us, and they're doing all the distribution and the creation of all the apps and everything else to go with it. So this is now going to go to 200 countries. It's going to be absolutely enormous.
And as you mentioned, you've moved away from the States for the record attempt. You're now in South Africa.
Yeah. Yes, we really wanted to be with all our friends in the US. That's the sort of starting point. We'd been there before. We got a lot of friends. We'd won awards from the Bureau of Land Management. We got a good pedigree there. But unfortunately, what had actually happened was that the Black Rock Desert had been used for extreme leisure purposes, and they'd effectively wrecked the desert.
This is the Burning Man festival.
The Burning Man, yeah, have 70,000 people running around there. And that doesn't do the desert any good. So we set up a program to try and find an alternative desert, and we found 30. And Andy Green set off going around the world to look at them all. And we eventually found the Haxking Pan in South Africa, which is absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely ideal. It's the right surface for us, and it's the right length, right altitude, and it's got about an 8-month weather window, which is brilliant.
But it's also covered in stones. Just tell me quickly about the process of removing the stones.
Yeah, well, you can see the situation. We suddenly realized we got a masterpiece in terms of a desert. The absolutely perfect desert. It's flat, superbly flat. The differential in height between one end and the other over 12 miles is just 10 feet. I mean, this place is brilliant. But there were 2 downsides. One was that there was a road on a causeway going across the middle. And secondly, there are 21 million square meters of stones. And so our partners, the Northern Cape government, said, fine, we'll take care of that. And so they cleared away the road on the causeway, and they've had 300 people working for 7 years, and they've picked up the stones. And the place is perfect, absolutely amazing. When you see it from the air, it's just unbelievable.
300 people for 7 years. How many man hours is that?
I think it works out at about 1,000 man years. Yeah, huge job. And what's great about it is it's brought employment to the local district, which were desperately poor, literally living on sort of subsistence level. And as a result of that, not only have they got Bloodhound education, but also they've, of course, got the masts. The masts have brought them better 3G than we have in London, and the authorities have put in a huge water pipeline, so they've now got water.
It's quite extraordinary to think about the reach of this project.
Yeah.
And also the scope of your job. You would think, okay, we've got somewhere flat to run the car, but actually you need 1,000 man-years to clear it, and then it needs to be funded, and it also needs to be educational, but you are not an education expert.
Certainly not.
It's just an overwhelming project.
Well, it's just a great collection of people, though. The fundamental thing that's so important in this is that the project is right. In other words, it's been done properly. The engineering has been done properly. The research has been done properly. We all believe in it. We're all absolutely committed to it. So now, having got as far as that, we've got to see it through somehow. And so it's a huge fight to keep it going and see it through.
And what stage is the project at now? How many people are working full time? And
we're very small at the moment because basically we've just done the Newquay run. So we run the car to 200 miles an hour. Had a very, very good response. Andy is very excited by it because he says, it really is a superb car to drive. We really got something very special here. So now the next stage now is to get ourselves ready to run in South Africa. We want to be in South Africa in September. There is a most enormous amount of work to be done. The money's got to be made. We've got to get all the organization together and set it all up there. Large numbers of people are probably going to come from all over the world to come and see this. So they've got to be looked after. It's a huge undertaking. So we're going to be there this year, 2018. 2019, we want to try and get a new world record of about 800 or so. And then at that point, we stop because then we've got a supersonic flow of the car. And then we can compare that with all the research data, make sure that we're safe, and then back in 2020 to finish it off.
What are the rough, I don't want to make it about money, but what are the rough overheads per month for a project like this?
Well, it peaks at the moment, it peaks during the build. And we had about 80 people working, and you're moving up towards £1 million a month.
And that all comes from sponsorship?
It has to, yeah. I haven't got it.
But did the government help you out for all the help you're doing for the country?
We've had a certain amount of support from the government, and they're very excited about getting involved. But we're still trying to get them to sign on the dotted line.
This might help. You never know.
Yeah, you never know.
The right person might just listen. But if a few years down the line, and I can imagine this still feels a long way away, you break the 1,000-mile-an-hour barrier, the job's done, the car goes down in legend, ends up in a museum, and you inspire a generation.
Yeah.
Do you think the disease will have been cured?
I don't know. I was talking to Andy about this. I said, Andy, you realize you're going to be, the most famous guy in the world with this thing. I mean, you really are. How are you going to deal with this? So Andy says, I'm just going to get my boat and go. So I've got a boat to refurbish. So, maybe that's where we're going. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, it's a lovely thought that 5 years from now we might have you and Andy on your boats next to each other. In well-earned land speed retirement. Richard, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time. And last thing, if people want to find out about the project, where's the best place for them to go to? Yeah,
the important thing is to go to the website, bloodhoundssc.com. And we are very, very strong in public engagement. So 35,000 people have paid to have their names on the car tail fin, so you can do that. You can join the Supporters Club and come down and join us most months and see what's happening. You come and join us in South Africa. So the Supporters Club is very, very important to the project.
Fabulous. Inspiring a generation, redefining engineering, rewriting the record books. No small task, but amazing to hear all about it. Thank you so much.
We're on the way.
As Richard says, they are on the way. This has been a huge project which has already broken and continues to break all sorts of engineering barriers. So make sure you check out bloodhoundssc.com for videos, news, and much, much more. We will see you next week on The Winning Mentality. In the meantime, subscribe, share, comment, leave reviews, tell your friends what we're up to, and we'll see you next week.